Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stanford Emergency Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Strehlow, Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Stanford. Artificial intelligence is moving fast, some say too fast, and it's already starting to reshape the way we practice medicine. To help us make sense of it all, I'm joined by Dr. Christian Rose. He's an emergency physician, an assistant professor, and a clinical informaticist at Stanford. His work focuses on building AI tools that can actually help doctors without disrupting how they work. And he's deeply engaged in the ethical side of using AI in real-time care. Dr. Rose, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. So glad to be here.
Let's start big picture. All this innovation comes with some big questions. Where are we headed? What's actually working in the real world? And what should make us stop and think?
When I think about artificial intelligence, I mostly think of it just as a way that we can use data and information technologies to mimic parts of what humans do or what we think humans use intelligence for. There's many different ways that artificial intelligence can look like that. It can be, sorting through data and looking for patterns, but it can also be writing and writing an Atlantic article or a New Yorker article or a scientific research paper. So artificial intelligence is all the forms of mimicking human intelligence, which is also a little limiting because we don't even think about the sort of ways in which humans don't work well and the things that machines could do, better than us / different than us on their own anyway.
I hear the terms generative AI and predictive AI. Can you help us understand these terms?
When we talk about that, what we mean is it's generating something. People saw Dolly. I think that was the earliest sort of version that I had seen broadly that friends were like, look at this generative AI. It'll make a picture when I describe what I want. It will generate something. Then we got GPT and Chat GPT, and we were like, oh, maybe now it will generate text for me, generate a summary. It will make, again, something for me. That is just to be distinguished from the predictive part, which is they take data, they make a prediction, and then the prediction that a generative model is using is what does Matt want this sentence to reflect, and what is the idea he's trying to get at? And it looks through multidimensional vector space and says, I think I've got a target on where I'm trying to get to, and gives you essentially the string through that, multidimensional space. The reason I think it's just important to think about how we use these terms is I've seen papers that refer to generative AI when they're talking about predictive AI. They mention predictive AI when they're actually just talking about observations or not, making predictions, but sorting different data points. That gets to the subset of machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, and then deep learning and neural networks, which are a subset of that and other things. So a lot of these are sort of new terms in emergency medicine, newish terms in medicine, though this is the third wave of artificial intelligence in the medical sphere. There were waves in the 60s, in the 80s and 90s, and then we have this most recent sort of third wave of AI in medicine. We've been using tools like this for a long time, and it's been at the forefront of where people thought medicine was going again for about like 60 years. We just didn't call it that. Data science and predictive analytics has been around for a long time. All of us have benefited from it in some way. And medicine has been using that and trying to allocate resources like liver transplants, which is, again, regression analyses and predictions.
Predicting, if it's predicting something, some outcome, you generally are thinking of it as a predictive model. If it's
Mhm.
generating new content or things, you're thinking of it as a generative model. But there is
Mhm.
a lot of overlap and complexity in how these terms are used
Yep,
and which models are doing what.
exactly.
But the other thing that I really took home from that is that I'm now realized that I've been using predictive AI maybe for 20 years because like I'm always
Yeah.
misspelling things in Google and it was always saying, "Did you mean?" And that you're telling me that's so I'm like really facile with AI. I've been doing that for
Yeah. Yeah, you have been. And also, I would say a lot of our emergency physician colleagues have all been parts of predictive AI as, regression analyses. And when we use our TI-83 plus to put in data points and get a curve and a best fit line, I think obviously these technologies have become Extremely robust. The amount of data that they can process is wild. The way that they present it back to us has gotten much easier to navigate.
So where are we at now? Like what AI tools are being used in the ED today?
Um, I have been doing informatics work since my college, like senior thesis was a little bit around space medicine, and that got me interested in the informatics space, which got to how do people place alerts or orders, and how do they get alerted to mistakes they might be making. And I'm going to be honest, very little has changed, I feel, even though I've been paying attention now for, I guess, what is that, like 17 years, 2008 till 2025. And then it's still addressing the same sort of problems we see over and over again in emergency medicine. The tools that I've seen people working on are things like Qventus, when I was in residency, trying to understand how people arrive in the ED and predict and have resources available. Queuing theory is an artificial intelligence, methodology to try to predict who's going to come in. That gets you to the next logical space that seen many companies try to work on, which is triage and improving, ESI
Mhm.
scores based on when someone comes and not leaving that up to a human who might be biased at the front desk and not really know that, the patient population X presents slightly different than patient population Y. And that still tends to be one of the biggest problems that people focus on right now in emergency medicine, as well as who is the most likely, sick or ill from the types of injuries, car accidents, motor vehicle accidents, or penetrating trauma. So a lot of the same tools are to me, a lot of the same things we thought about before to ultimately target and treat at-risk patients who we might otherwise fail.
I think that we've all felt the pain of patient flow. We've all felt the pain of patients being triaged into difficult areas for us to manage them because they're
Mhm.
under or over triaged and things like that. And a lot
Yeah,
of
and
this ends
who
up
who
falling on
needs to
time.
go where? Flight, I think flight things. One of our colleagues, our awesome colleagues, Dr. Rice, works on you have a critical resource and you worry about who needs to get sent. We don't want to overwhelm systems, and that, there's a burden there on us that we worry about. So sometimes we like to come up with a machine learning or artificial intelligence model to make that easier for us.
When you see these models being rolled out on the front lines, actually in the emergency department, how do you see clinicians or emergency medicine staff responding to them?
Mm. I'm gonna flip it back to you. How have you seen people responding to
I
them?
try to shut my eyes. I try to shut my eyes a
Okay,
lot and ask
fair.
the experts like yourself.
Yeah.
I think it comes up that the response is a little bit into two camps, right? I think there are people that are what I would call over adopters and people that are under adopters, or at least overexcited and underexcited. And I think we, as emergency medicine providers, have a reasonable dose of skepticism around them. I think our health systems may not have enough skepticism around them. I don't know if they necessarily fully understand the complexity and the expertise that go into running the emergency department at the clinical level. And so
Yeah.
I do see that kind of difference. So I would say most clinicians are responding to them right now with what I would say is some skepticism, but I'm
Mhm.
not sure that the health systems at large are doing that.
Let's just think of our tension points. There's the population health needs for emergency medicine. I know you think a lot about this in your work too. There's what a community needs, what a hospital needs, if we subdivide down to that. So, larger community and distribution of resources, the hospital at any point in time, what it can handle and not. That then funnels down to the provider, and then the provider needs are often different than what the patient needs. And each one of those represents a point at which we're trying to find alignment. An overused word in many ways, but also you're trying to say, how do we meet all of these goals at once? I feel for our colleagues, the amount of things we try to hold at once while trying to make a decision is really tough. And rarely does any one tool capture all of those at once. And so I think some of the skepticism can be that you feel like a competing demands, which is the patient in front of you, and always your responsibility to them, while also recognizing there's the next patient to come in, what the situation will look like in 5 minutes, and then the larger health system, and how resources get distributed. The reason the skepticism in models can come up is that to your point, some people might like it because they say, oh, this helped me sort of turn off. I was overthinking, or I'm so fatigued trying to hold all of these elements at once, be a population health scientist and a primary care physician. This helps me just sort of limit and say this patient, could go to A, B, or C destination, or those are all reasonable outcomes. And it helps you offload some of that cognitive burden, which is some of the things that we're, researching at Stanford. Um, I think that when I see people and I look at the literature from how they've used most of the like to date deployed technologies, they've just had very small effects. It's often hard for anything in medicine to show a large scale improvement in something that we already do kind of well. And that's not to say medicine is perfect right now or doesn't need to change. It's just quite hard to put in the resources up front to build a model, to find the data points, to do all of the cleaning, to deploy it in a way that's authentic to the patient and physician experience, then to see the results and see if that's actually changed in a formative way the outcome of that individual patient. That's really hard. Again, each of those transitional points is an area of research and is an area of need for someone to take ownership of how well the tool functions. Some people either find, oh my God, it's helped me in something that is truly burdensome. And others say, oh, I didn't practice this way. I practice bread and butter, decision rule-based medicine to begin with. And now this has just added 14 additional considerations. The EHR was supposed to make it easier for us to place orders, prevent medical errors, and make it so the physicians had less administrative burden of trying to get the work done. And it turns out the EHR has just like doubled that and made it way worse, such that 50% of our time is spent trying to click through and place an order and find the right order in the right context. So there's hope that some of these tools will make that better. It's just that humans are human, and the way we engage is often unique to each person's current problem, and those are often a moving target too. So some people on the one end of the bell curve, they're like, I love it, I would use it every day. Some people are like, I had it messed up twice, so I don't trust it anymore, I'll never use it again. Then you have everyone in the middle who's like, it helps some of the time with some of the questions I had. And I'm sort of ambivalent. I would say most people fall into that, and most of the implementations, all the way back to CPOE, have been sort of the same result. There's very few things that it's just like this is the way to do it, and then we've changed wholesale.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the hype train's a little out front of where we're actually at, but I know you're a basketball player. I'm a basketball player. I teach my kids not to throw the ball where the other player,
Mm,
not
mm,
where they're going to be. And I do see when I look where we're going to be a few years down the road, the combination of the EHR with AI and integrated electronic health records across multiple systems and situations is going to allow us to unlock some things that are going to make that have the potential to be really impactful in our care.
yeah.
I do worry though about the downsides, right? And the risks of this. And I think there are so many that it's like we can't cover them all. But
Yeah.
tell me, what are some of the ones that really would keep you up at night? What are the biggest risks of us adopting AI in emergency care? Or at least
Yeah.
let's say early adoption.
Yeah. Well, let's also think the risks to whom. Let's break down or just talk about at least two. Risk to the patients themselves and the care we provide, and the risk to us as physicians. The EHR hurt us a lot, actually, caused a lot of burnout, and has made it so that patients don't feel like they get time with their doctors. So there was a harm to the patient-physician relationship because of technology. It's rare that we have a problem or need an AI model for the average, you hear hoofbeats and think horses. We usually need it for I hear hoofbeats and I'm worried it might be a zebra. Let me not miss the zebra. It has been really difficult to have data that supports decision making for patients that truly takes into account all of their needs, and not just their clinical scenario, but like what they go home to, who their doctor is, how to get them and deliver that care. So while you might diagnose stuff, diagnosis is only a part of what we do. In fact, a small part of what we do. So the risk is that you automate some of that. A lot of people get a version of care that's cookie cutter in ways and lacks the deep knowledge you need by having a human in the loop that can actually still steer the ship for them. That can leave people marginalized at the edge, leaves the edge people more at the edge. So you have a doubling down of the negative effects for people that aren't usually part of the health system. People who don't have access might get access, but might have a differential version of it. That's like one of the big, again, low-hanging fruit versions of the risk is you automate away some of the human elements because we just don't have the humans, and people get a version that's not quite, it's not quite the version they expected, and it leaves them feeling, again, sort of left at the margins.
I've
For
heard
the,
you,
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I've heard you write and speak on bias,
Mhm.
right? And I think, as you talk about people that are on the margins, that's one of the things that you've really talked about and opened up my thinking around. Can you explain to people just an overview of why AI can actually exacerbate bias? Because I think we think about humans being biased.
Mhm.
But I know that people that are in this space, like yourself, talk a lot about machines being biased. So can you explain, like, how does
Yeah.
that happen? Is there things we can do and what's being done?
Okay, so there are certain hospitals that we all know that have had EHRs for a long time and early adopters. The VA is one of those, and then a lot of academic centers. When we think of academic centers and where they're located, they're not generally representative of a lot of the country. Who lives where? And if you're in a liberal coastal city versus a middle of the country, smaller rural distribution city, and different access to healthcare. We'll just start there. So different people we know present to different types of hospitals, and different hospitals have different access to digital versions of patient information. The data that's been collected that we use, that we throw into the models, then is from places where people have access to the highest quality of academic care on average. And San Francisco patients look a little bit different or respond a little different to people in Houston, which is a little bit different than Indianapolis or New York City. That's fine if you know and are aware of that, but it also means that anything like being operated at scale just doesn't have a great way of, okay, here's a patient population who goes to the rural hospital. That is still on a paper chart, or maybe just started on an EMR. That EMR doesn't actually send data to the big companies that build the model. And so it sort of always lives in the periphery. And if they ever present to one of the major centers, the model doesn't really know how to deal with them. So to me, it's sort of a problem of certain places have more data points, but that doesn't accurately represent the whole picture. And I'm not saying that every person and every model has to. Some friends of ours talk about having hyper local algorithms then and just deploying them at their shop. But if you didn't have any data to begin with, and every patient you see is a sort of edge case, you're gonna keep those people who were in part of it stuck at the fringe because we don't have a good way of dealing with them. I do want to just briefly state though that it's important to remember that humans themselves do things and make decisions that are based on our experiences, and physicians may move around the country and go to places. There's a real opportunity for artificial intelligence to take out some unconscious biases that humans do anyway. Humans make these biases too, so you can flip the script and say, hey, can I develop a tool that mostly just alerts someone to the fact that they might be missing something, or they might have prematurely closed on their differential. People working on
Right.
differential builders. And so there are ways to mitigate that same problem with the same tool, but framing the question more from a, hey, what might I be missing here? As opposed to how do I get this done as quickly as possible or deliver the best for this person? There's just many ways in which those biases can seep in. There's also many ways to address them. And I don't want to leave the impression that it will all ultimately lead to this. Something we need to be aware of, that not everyone is seen. It's like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If something squeaks, you've heard of it, chronically a problem for you in one place. It just might not be for other people.
Yeah, I see. Like, I read an article the other day about the rise of black lung again, right?
Mm,
And you can
geez.
see
Yeah.
how those patients that are now coming back with having a disease that we've kind of forgotten in most of the country and who probably aren't plugged
Mm,
into our databases that are building our AI models, may not work well when they come in with a cough
yep.
somewhere else where they are using those models or starting to implement those models. Uh,
Yep.
so there's that risk, but I love that you mentioned some of the positives there. You said like, hey, there is this risk, but if we're attentive to that risk of bias, that we can actually help it alleviate some of our biases that we have.
Yep.
Tell me about some other things that you think that, are potential positives and that you're excited about with AI in healthcare.
I worry about not setting realistic goals. I think things are blowing up, and I actually am very excited. It's just that we're probably in the trough of disillusionment right now,
Hmm.
because people were super hyped from when they first heard of GPT, and almost no business has seen a large scale return on investment for what they've put up for their AI models. Sort of all over, people put up billions of dollars and they're not sure when they're going to see their money again. That is a normal experience too. That is a normal, well-known, well-described Gartner hype cycle, you know, 40 plus years. I'm trying to think of when that was originally defined. And so it's important to not become disillusioned for long-term formative change to remember, okay, what's our goal and where are we setting our sights? And so a lot of the reasons I spend time thinking about what can go wrong is mostly to try to avoid the trough of disillusionment. I think thinking about bias, thinking about the worries is important, but I'm actually quite excited. And I think the history of science, the history of technological innovation also says that like our jobs will probably get, I think there's a lot of reason to be worried that they might get worse. The risk to physician practice is very real right now. I'm sure you have heard in our audience, people worry that they're just going to get replaced by AI tools, that like you'll just loop the doctor out, that maybe we'll uptrain advanced practice providers to just do the stuff then while the AI model is doing all of the critical thinking. And
Mhm.
that's a reasonable thought. That has not ever been the case in automation, whether it's tellers, autopilot in planes, the loom, like that has just changed industries more than it's ever wholesale, like knocked a major part of it out. So I recognize that people should be worried, and that is one of the major risks of these technologies to our work. Maybe we will become even more, data checkers than we currently are. And we don't get to spend as much time doing the analytic thinking, the talking to your friend and trying to, figure out this really interesting case in front of you because it's answered in a second from, putting it into one of the many tools that are available.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge where if we say, oh, we can take away some of that thinking, that knowledge, that expertise. One of the challenges I have is, AI models currently are not great at fact checking themselves,
Mhm.
right? And the hardest thing to do is to figure out when your senior resident is wrong. It's not
Mm.
hard to figure out when your junior resident or the medical student is wrong. It's hard to figure out when the senior resident is wrong because they're right 90% of the time, 95, 99% of the time. And so it actually takes more expertise to fact check the model. So I do think that it's going to be tough to figure out that balance of, okay, we're going to put this AI into the loop, but then we're going to have somebody with like a real expertise. But
Yep.
how do you have those people if you've relied on AI for most of it? Because so much of it is built over experience and study and
Yep.
perseverance, which may just not kind of our system may not be designed for that. But on the positive side, most of the world doesn't operate like where you and I are operating, right? I do a lot of global health, and most of the world operates in a situation where there's a massive healthcare workforce shortage that's
Mhm.
getting worse every
Yep.
day. And that is true in the United States, and it's more true globally. And so things we can do to alleviate that workforce shortage is
Mhm.
is just imperative.
Yep.
Otherwise, millions of people will die and potentially die annually from just a
Yep.
lack of healthcare workforce. So I do see that there's so much opportunity there to augment our practice. I always worry about trust, and I think trust gets talked about a lot. And you see that with it's automating planes or you're automating driving and things like that. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your views on whether our patients and our providers are going to trust AI models. Not whether they should, but whether they will. And I think most of the time I read that people won't trust them. My concern is always that people will trust them and they'll trust them too soon. What do
Mm.
you think?
Um, I think there's a couple of ways to frame it. I think trust is a huge issue in all of healthcare. Back to our bias discussion, the reason some people never showed up was just trust in the ability to go to the ED and get provided with the care that they needed. There's lots of people today who don't trust coming to the healthcare system because of concerns about deportation or what happens even where we work. And lots of our colleagues work endlessly and tirelessly to try to make people feel like there's trust in the healthcare system. I think then to the tools, a lot of this comes from the use of it, like any tool. Do I trust my stethoscope, the ultrasound to work? Or there are artifacts all the time on the ultrasound. We don't have long-term discussions about the windowing, and what this artifact meant. We go, oh, that didn't work that well. I'm not really sure what I'm seeing, so I go to another one or I ask, for support. I think in the history of technology and implementations and things that we've been developing again since the 60s, a thing that actually isn't as new as we may perceive. A part of that is having champions and people to answer the questions and being ready to um, not go to bat for the technology, but go to bat for us and our patients together such that we can trust that when there's a problem or if we feel like there's an inaccuracy, there's something to do about it. The biggest discussion I hear on this from the trust on the physician and the patient side has been that you'll get an autonomous version of care and people won't be able to get out of the loop once they're in it
Mm.
and they'll become hugely mistrustful, say, I've got to go get my human friend. I got to go call my friend, which we've all experienced too. Someone's called you because they said, I'm at an ED. They say my dad's having a blank. Does that make sense based on what's going on? And you go like, oh my God, it's 3 in the morning for me. And I'm getting this frantic call from a friend I haven't seen in 10 years. Um, Trust in healthcare it's a huge issue that again people in our department work a lot on, yourself included. Um, I'm a pro champions of the system. I am pro testing things heavily upfront, having stakeholders involving everyone in these tools. That's sort of what our paper was about. The EHR was sort of hammer looking for nails, and there was a lot of reasons to just get people up to date fast, which left a lot of people feeling like this thing was made not with them and their best interests in mind.
Mhm.
Again, AI has been around for a while. It's just finally graduated and come of age enough to answer some of the difficult questions we have had a hard time, doing at scale before. I think that in order to have trust, you need to feel like you are able to push back, stop a system, and not feel like a Kafka-esque, like once I'm put into the AI, it's just it. I'm stuck there, and then because then you'll avoid it forever. And I think that goes to patient and provider side. Providers don't want to feel like they're always going to be pigeonholed. One of the risks is maybe you're just going to do a ton of testing because in order for a machine to know what's going on, it's going to recommend the CT, the angio, all the blood work, whatever. So you'll be given a recommendation you can't do, you can't really fulfill, then you'll feel let down by it, and you won't have any sort of recourse for your patient, or if you are a patient, to get anything else. So you'll just sort of feel let down and distrustful and mistrustful of the system. So I think from what I've seen, the trust comes from the ability to feel like you're an engaged member and that there's someone you can call up when you need a hand. And it's all happening so fast right now that I think many people feel like it's computers versus us.
So there's a lot coming our way, right? And I
Mhm.
think you mentioned that physicians are feeling skeptical and overwhelmed at times. What advice can you give them?
Mm.
What do you say to those folks that come to you
My,
and express
yeah,
skepticism?
parts of innovation in informatics are all just what every emergency physician friend of ours does anyway. We process information, we try to build tools. Everyone, most of the EM physicians I meet are as good or better than me at all of these things, and they didn't necessarily do an informatics fellowship. Um, that means engaging with the technology, experimenting with it wherever you can, trying stuff out to see and find. Again, when ultrasound started, Ultrasound was first used. I think its first medical use was on an eyeball because it's a fluid-filled sac, and ultrasound works really well in it. And then people started trying it on other stuff. This is the way that medicine advances, and then has been doing that since the stethoscope. So really, what that means to me is just you don't have to do it on clinical care necessarily, but you can practice and see how different models work. Free versions of almost all of these things are accessible right now before they eventually get more expensive. Ask questions, try stuff out, think about the cases you encounter, and then look to see if there's a way for these technologies to sort of help. I think that's actually normal academic emergency medicine and just emergency medicine is trial and error and not doing anything inherently dangerous, but trying to see where the future is going to lie. The only way you get there is by taking your first steps and your first movements towards the end destination you're talking about earlier.
Well, that's a great place for us to leave it. But we always like to close with a question that's a
Mm,
little bit on the lighter side.
mm,
So you, in my mind, are kind of the epitome of a Renaissance person. Again,
yeah.
it's hard for me to find anything that you don't know about or think about. So if you weren't in medicine, what would you be doing?
Oh my God. I mean, it's just so
Besides
when
everything.
I know. Well, when we come up with these in our heads, it's we're kids for the most part, and I think for me, my head is still in space, and would love to be an astronaut and get to look back on the Earth like Carl Sagan and enjoy the pale blue dot that is the world that we live in, and try
And
to.
our colleague, Anil Menon,
I
who's
know.
been
Yeah.
selected to go to space next year, emergency medicine physician, proud grad of
Yeah.
Stanford. So
Yeah.
don't give up on your dreams, Christian. On that note, that's a wrap for today's episode. Huge thanks to Dr. Rose for sharing his insight and experience. Clearly, we've only scratched the surface of a fast moving and fascinating field. Keep tuning in for more on this topic in the future. For those listening, be sure to check out the show notes for links to Dr. Rose's latest work and studies. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. And as always, we want to hear from you. Send us your questions, ideas, or feedback at the link in the description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. And until then, keep taking care of anyone, anything, at any time. I think you need to speak at an actuarial conference. You can just be like, hey, I know what you guys are facing, but man, don't worry about it. It's all good.
Thanks. Yeah, real life goal there. Actuarial Conference Europe 2026, baby.
That's right. Line it up.